And finally, NASA's had the opportunity to keep all this secret. Why? Because it owns all the rockets. It owns the spacecraft. It controls the data analysis, the tracking systems, the telemetry, the analysis on the ground, the computers, the image processing, the procedures of public dispensation. It controls all of the system, an end-to-end control. So if it finds something interesting, how are they going to, how are you going to get a leak if the people in the system are a handful of people who believe that if they leak it, they will be responsible for potentially destroying civilization? That means that it takes very courageous people who, when they're ordered to destroy information and keep it secret, even at the tender age of 20-something, which is about the same age I was when I was with Cronkite. And that brings us to Dr. Ken Johnson, who was the former data and photo manager at NASA's Lunar Receiving Laboratory in Houston, who has an extraordinary documented tale of NASA's efforts to keep secret what it found on the moon that will change history forever, and it's well past time that history should change. Dr. Johnson?
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that very much. What I'll do this morning, I want to take you back a little bit and show you where I wound up being at the right place at sort of the right time, and hopefully did the right thing. Those of you who may have looked up in Google for my name prior to October the 19th, you would have probably run across this as a solar system ambassador with my bio on it, giving you an outlines of what I've done in my life. Of course, learning to fly in the Marine Corps, and after that going on to work at the Johnson Space Center. At the time, we called it the Manned Spacecraft Center. I was working for the Grumman Aerospace Corporation at the time and became one of the 5 test pilots for Grumman to work on the lunar module. We had the privilege of helping train all the astronauts to fly in the lunar module and do all of the lunar surface experiments that we performed on the moon. While working as a solar system ambassador for over 4 years, that's 2004 through 7, I received numerous certificates of appreciation for the efforts that I did and being a part of the team. Interesting events took place on October the 19th, just barely a week and a few days ago. Early in the morning, I received a phone call from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Mind you, this book, Dark Mission, came out on October the 9th. 2 weeks later, a week or so later, on 19th, I received a phone call from the Solar System Ambassador Organization asking me what I knew about the book and what my feelings were about the book. And we discussed it at some length, and I was told, well, I've never crossed the line when doing my Solar System Ambassador duties, which is an outreach program for NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to go into schools and clubs and organizations to present a good face of what we're doing in space. Anyway, I said, I've never crossed that line. I've always presented the right thing. And they said, well, we're concerned about what your loyalties might be. And I said, well, I've known Mr. Hoagland for quite a few years. And the answer is, well, we know Mr. Hoagland. We really appreciate what he's done in the past, but we're not too happy with where he's going right now. And we discussed it a little bit further and then said that I was told that, well, if you wanted to resign, that would sure solve the problems a lot. Well, in the conversation I was told that, well, there are people within NASA and JPL that have their own personal opinions of just about any subject or any area that you might want to look into. And I think that's rather interesting since they were paid and I'm a non-paid volunteer. So that Friday on the 19th, I put together a little memo and sent an email out to Ms. Kay Ferrari of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and told her that I was not going to resign, that I felt that under the protection of the First Amendment that I had a right to free speech and I had a right to my own opinions, and that if they really chose to drop me from the program, that I'd like to lodge a counter and ask what the grievances program might be for that. All right, now keep in mind these dates are really important. October the 9th, the book comes out. October the 19th, I get a phone call. That afternoon, I sent out an email saying I'm not going to resign. That evening, I received a call from George Norrie on the Coast to Coast radio program, and he wanted to discuss whether I was being dropped from the program, and I explained that, Well, I was kind of pressured that way, but I've chosen not to resign, and his final comments to me were, you do not resign. You don't go out unless you're kicking and screaming and fighting all the way out. And that's what I did. Now, again, looking back at October the 19th, I received 1 week later, on October the 26th, just this past Friday, a registered certified mail overnight express letter from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that was the one I showed you just a couple minutes ago, that said that they were accepting my resignation from the Solar System Ambassador Program. Now, I found it interesting that it took from October the 19th until the 26th to do an overnight certified letter dated, or in my opinion, backdated to the 19th, which was the date of my email stating that I was not going to resign. All right, we'll put that behind and go back to the early days. You see me as a young Marine Corps pilot in training. Received, of course, the Leatherneck Magazine award for being one of the top recruits. Also, the pre-flight school, completion of pre-flight. I want to document the fact that I do have the credentials to be where I was at the right time, the right place, and hopefully with the right stuff. Back in the old days of the Manned Spacecraft Center, which you can see by the picture up there, I'm going to take you on a little tour of the Johnson Space Center. While I was there working for Grumman, our whole focus was on this little bug, which we affectionately call the lunar module. And that one would be Apollo 14, I believe. Looks like Apollo 15 from our area. Now, my job as a consultant pilot, or test pilot for Grumman, was to be in the spacecraft during all the testing that was taking place. There were 5 of us, so we were working 24 hours a day. At any time that one of the astronauts were to come into the lunar module, they had to have one of us representing the builders of the lunar module on board to explain and help train the astronauts on the functions of all the over 486 different switches, circuit breakers, gauges, and dials that were inside that spacecraft. So I had the opportunity and pleasure of working with all of the lunar mission astronauts as they came through. This is inside the front cover of my spacecraft pilot's logbook, in which it shows some of the classes that I took prior to the astronauts taking the courses, so that I was prepared to do my job when they came aboard, as well as work them. Here's a picture of myself in a follow spacesuit just inside the front door of the lunar module. So it's kind of hard to say I wasn't there when we've got pictures. This is an inside of one of the pages of my logbook. As you can see, we kept track not only by date, but then the spacecraft or other spacecraft that we had tested. I was the test director back at Bethpage for 5 weeks. Things were happening awful fast back then. It felt like 5 years. Working 12, 14 hours a day back at Bethpage. But as test director, was responsible for all the final form, fit, and function of all the equipment going inside the lunar modules that were on the assembly line back at Bethpage. In this particular case, Neil Armstrong came on board, and I would get the astronauts to sign my logbook. There are about 50 some odd pages inside that logbook that all have signatures of the different astronauts as they came through the cover of my logbook. And it shows here that I did complete over 3,000 hours as a spacecraft pilot aboard the LTA-8 and other spacecrafts. So in reality, I actually had more time as a spacecraft pilot than Neil Armstrong did when he landed on the moon. This little spacecraft, which was called LTA-8, which was Lunar Test Article number 8, was the primary one we actually used in the vacuum chambers at the Johnson Space Center. And big, nice aerial view. This is not the center that I knew back during the Apollo. They've added a lot more buildings and all. But I'll take you on a little tour.